Captains of Industry, brought to you by Airtel.
It's believed that poor infrastructure has added 40% to the cost of doing business here in Africa. For the first time, though, a figure is now attached to the problem, and as a result, major economies such as Kenya, Nigeria and South Africa have started massive build projects for roads and energy in particular. Political leaders have even calculated the social costs of poor infrastructure. Not only will local economies stay in the dark ages if we don't do something about it, but societies will implode if basic services such as electricity and water are not provided. Now, ABB has always argued that it can no longer be business as usual in Africa, and talking us through some of the solutions is Pone, who's the ABB CEO in South Africa and responsible for Southern Africa. He's our Captain of Industry today. Thanks so much for your time, Carlos. I mean, I say that African leaders have now attached a cost. They've started talking more openly about infrastructure, but in your view, have they really calibrated this problem?
I think in some countries it's really started taking speed. I mean, South Africa for certain has been a country that has got this infrastructure built taking place for some time. You know, we started not only for the World Cup, we had started before the World Cup. We had a handicap period where on the electricity infrastructure we have been for 10 to 12 years without doing any building. I think that that is now taking speed. On the water side is taking speed. I think that the road infrastructure and the railways infrastructure is also getting a lot better. So you know, I think South Africa is taking a leadership as far as the infrastructure build is concerned. We have other countries around us where this has taken place. I think you see a lot in Mozambique. The mining industry is helping develop the railways and the roads, so we see a lot of built in Mozambique as well on the electrical infrastructure, on the water infrastructure, and I think that there are other countries that are a little bit left behind, but I think that they're all catching up. People are starting to understand that to build infrastructure is the responsibility of the government in conjunction and in partnership with the private sector.
On average, we're told that infrastructure spend in Africa is about 3% of GDP. So if you just looked at the statistics, we could argue not enough is being done. We're talking about it in fora like World Economic Forum, we're talking about it at CNBC, but not enough in terms of the capital is being directed there.
No, I agree with you. I mean, we need as countries, as African countries, and especially as sub-Saharan African countries, to build a lot more that has been planned for. Obviously, financing is a problem, but if the projects are good, it has been proven that multilateral financing agencies, bilateral financing agencies, and even the private sector, most of the times come into the fore and help on this infrastructure build. But we probably need to duplicate the percentage that comes out of GDP.
What does profitability mean for business? I mean, you've personally argued for a public-private partnership model, but yet we still see that 15% of infrastructure investments come from the private sector. You earlier said it's the government's responsibility to do this. Well, governments are not playing ball, are not doing so fast enough. So what do we need to do to make it profitable for business to come through?
I think you know, business are not financing agencies. So I think that business can play a part of it, but they are always reluctant to finance out of their own balance sheet. You know, but when it comes to governments, we must also distinguish that there are governments that are more reluctant and governments that are very open onto financing. And if you look at South Africa and the amount of money that Eskom is spending on new infrastructure, on new build, on new you know, to satisfy the demand, and if you have seen the amount of money that the government is guaranteeing, you know, it is you know, it is with satisfaction that we see this. We saw that on the roads, we saw that on the railways. There are governments. I mean, if I look at what's happening in Nigeria with the new president, I mean, power is some of the things he's talking about over the last week. He's talking about water infrastructure. He's talking about roads infrastructure. Ghana is another example where we have seen water and electricity infrastructure. We have seen it in Mozambique.
Right.
So there are countries that are really at the forefront, and there are other ones because of their historic past, because of wars that are not so advanced. But we see Africa with a very, very positive eyes at this point.
I mean, power, power, power. You've said it from the moment we began this conversation,
Yes.
and there's no doubt Africa needs to do something about getting electricity to people. Only 30% of the population across the continent has energy security. But from your assessments, where do we stand in the process?
As I said, it's different. It's different on different countries. There are countries that are putting a lot of their priority into electricity, let's call out of the power side of it, or the energy side of it. And there is a huge correlation between GDP per person and the number of kilowatts per person. And you will see on any graph that the more kilowatts you have per person, the biggest is the GDP. And the poorest nations are the ones with the less access to electricity. And you see it in South Africa, where most of the population do have access to electricity. You see it in North Africa, in Tunisia, in Egypt, where the access to electricity is almost around between the 90s and the 100%. 100%. What does that mean to GDP per person? So for sure, the access to electricity is fundamental to industrial development.
Where does ABB come into the picture then?
Well, we are not only on electricity. We are not only on transmission and distribution of electricity. We are also on power automation and energy efficiency. There are two ways of looking at electricity. One is to generate more electricity and transmit and distribute this electricity to the people, and others in countries that are more industrialized. If we look at Africa, we are in South Africa the most industrialized country, where energy efficiency is fundamental. We saw the other day Eskom asking the big users of electricity to cut their electricity. So you can either cut it, you can or you can save on the energy side. So we can help on power generation, we can help on transmission distribution, but also we can help making companies a lot more energy efficient than they are today.
Before we talk about companies being energy efficient, let's talk about the policy environment. I often feel like we're clutching at straws. If you just look at what's happening here, we're talking about hydropower, we're talking about nuclear power, we're talking about building coal-based fire stations, for instance, we're talking about renewables. It's almost as if we're looking at all the options but need to target the one that offers at least immediate solutions. Do you find that that's a very cumbersome, difficult environment to work in?
Yeah, well, it has been a lot more confusing until November, December, where we do have a plan. Where we do have a plan for South Africa, where we know what is the combination between coal, possible nuclear, and renewable energy. You have seen that on the loans coming out to South Africa, there is a huge component coming out of renewable energy. We have also seen that there is even at Eskom quite a strategic decision to either go into renewables or to help into renewables. But we mustn't forget that the demand is huge, and we need to build fast. And the costs on a developing country are also to be taken into account. We can't have a developing nation to have huge electricity costs, huge telecom costs, huge traveling costs, would be it rail or road. And we need to combine that. So I think that we will still see in the picture coal-fired power plants.
They say South African companies are some of the worst and the largest polluters in the world. If you look at the top 10 companies that are polluters, at least 2 or so South African companies feature. Obviously, we're now starting to see co-generation agreements with some industrial players, but there is a sense that there's a consciousness that's needed in South Africa. You talk about efficiency. What's your experience of companies saying we want to be more efficient?
It may be so that some of the companies are on the 10 top polluters. I don't have those statistics. But one thing I can say is that there is a huge conscience in South Africa, a huge conscience on CEOs, on CFOs, on top managers, that we need to reduce our carbon footprint, that we need to have more energy efficiency companies. And I mean, if you look at South Africa, since 15, 20 years ago, the biggest companies, which are called the biggest polluters, they have been quite at the forefront of reducing carbon footprint. I talk about Eskom, I talk about Sasol, I talk about the paper industry. So we probably have companies at the top, but certainly conscience-wise, we are at the forefront.
I mean, you're responsible for Southern Africa as well. What's the experience in terms of energy awareness within the sub-region?
Well, we do have a lot of energy awareness, and I think that the problem that most of Southern Africa confronts, it's the power generation side. We have a lot of demand. We don't have enough capacity, and that's not only in South Africa. That goes to the countries surrounding South Africa. Even though we have huge possibilities to build, let's say, hydropower plants. We talked about hydro in South Africa. You know, South Africa does not have enough water for hydro. But if you look around, you have got Inga in Congo DRC, which has got a capacity for 40 gigawatts. You have got the Zambezi River, which has got hydropower plants in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, and in Mozambique. 2 weeks ago, I was crossing the Zambezi River on a barge. Because we are doing lines onto the Vale coal mine. And I can tell you, the possibilities in some of those countries are huge. What we need is to make sure that we have got more regional integration so that power can flow around those countries.
What are the technologies that are going to enhance access and also efficiency? I keep on reading about smart grids. What are those supposed to be? Well,
there are 2 or 3 technologies that are not so new, but they are not widely used in Africa. Even though that in some countries in Africa we had some of these projects which are very old. We have got the Inga Kolwezi line in DRC, which is an HVDC line, which is direct current, which means that the losses are a lot lower, especially at long distances. We have the Kawarabasa line into the Apollo station here by Olifantsfontein, which is HVDC. We have got now an HVDC light line on the Caprivi, coming from Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, which is, I must say, the latest technology in the world. So it's not because we are in Africa we don't use the latest technology in the world. So if we look at smart grids, what we need is to make sure that the losses are less, that the energy that we produced gets as much as possible to its users. And when we look at smart grids, what we have is that we have grids which are either HVDC, which transmit at long distances with less losses, or that we can have software system that guarantees that energy gets into the right places at the right time with the less losses.
And I think also into the right sectors that are drivers of the economy. So we're going to talk about those in just a moment.